It is a great honor and pleasure for me to be here, be back at Sculpture in Motion. It is literally one of my favorite events of the year. The combination of these amazing cars in this remarkable setting is unmatched, and it's a wonderful thing also to support this beautiful institution. So I'm very honored to be a part of this. It is something that I think is a basic illustration of what it is I'm going to talk about. And as Francis mentioned, I am the CEO of the Audrain Automobile Museum, the Audrain Group in Newport, Rhode Island. And what I'm going to do is to give you a preview, you are the first to receive this, of an exhibition which will be opening at the Audrain on December 10th of 2022 and running until March 5th, 2023. So when those of you go back to Newport, come to see the show. And if you have any occasion to go up to the freezing north for the holidays, please stop in at Newport. Newport is a beautiful place, even when it's cold. And stop in and come to see the museum, of which we're very proud. It's a wonderful thing, and of course, all of you here appreciate great architecture. And if you don't know, the Audrain Automobile Museum is one of the architectural highlights of Newport itself on Bellevue Avenue, with many of the great cottages, a 1903 Bruce Price Italian Renaissance Palace, and quite a marvelous place to see and to look at cars in. And what we try to do in our exhibitions at the Audrain is to present cars in a context. And the Audrain collections are quite special because they range from 1889, and I'm going to make 1899 to 2022. Now, it might be interesting because those of you who know cars say, there's a car up here that's earlier than 1899. Haha, yes there is. But therein lies the tale as well. And this show, Early Landmarks in Automotive Engineering, I think is a really important show for a variety of reasons. One, because it covers one of my favorite periods in automotive history, which is the period between the beginning of the 20th century and World War I. This exhibition goes up to World War II. And when you think about the range of imagination and development in the automobile, it's absolutely mind-blowing to think about where it started and where it ended up by the time 1939 rolled around. So I'm going to just touch on a few of the cars in the exhibition and what they represent. And also, I would love to take some questions if any of you have questions as well about this topic, about any other topics, how to tie a bow tie, anything that's really germane to our talk today. But what I'm going to do is, if everyone hopefully can have has a view of these, I will stand out of the way. If I'm standing in the way of one of the boards, just say, Donald, could you please move so I can see what you're talking about? The first board is entitled A Brave New World. And the first car on that is an 1886 Benz Patent Motorwagen. And it's a replica. None of the three original Benz Patent Motorwagens exist any longer, but Mercedes-Benz had a craftsman in the UK recreate a number of them for the centenary of the company. And we are fortunate enough to have one of those in the collection. And it's a fascinating thing because one of the unsung heroes, let me take a step sideways. If any of you were here last year, I gave a talk called Women Take the Wheel, Fashion, Modernity, and the Automobile. And I spoke about how the automobile changed the role of women in society, and certainly in fashion, but certainly in society as well, and how women changed the motor car. I'll touch on that a little bit in this little talk as well. But one of the things which is sort of an unsung story of the history of the motor car is the 1886 Benz Patent Motorwagen is not so notable for what it represented in terms of the future of the car. It is, after all, a very spindly tricycle with a very weak 0.75 horsepower engine with a top speed of 10 dazzling miles per hour. But what it represents in the fact that it was the first long-distance trip taken with a horseless carriage. Bertha Benz, Carl Benz's wife, unknown to him, they say, but more on that story in a moment, took this car along with two of her sons to visit her parents in Pforzheim, Germany, from their home in Mannheim. And the round trip is 180 kilometers. One way, the first way they went, was 66 miles. It took them 12 hours to make the trip. And she communicated to her husband Carl via telegram because he got home and realized, oh, Bertha's gone out with the boys. Oh, one of the cars is missing from the factory. He put two and two together and realized that she had gone out with the car. And she had done it to prove to him, as well as all the people that were helping them finance the company, that this was something which is actually practical to do. You didn't just have to ride your motor vehicle, your horseless carriage, around your yard or a few blocks away from your home, that it actually could be used for over-the-road travel. Now, most of us today who get very frustrated at taking a trip that lasts more than 15 minutes, I don't think any of us could imagine a 12-hour marathon trip. And also, you notice the size of the Ben Spaten Motorwagen. And I said that Bertha went with her 2 sons, which is very useful because when they came to a hill, they both had to push Bertha up the hill in the car. So it was something that was not anything that we would accept today, but it was very much the start of modern automobiling.
Excuse me, Donald, she didn't take her husband. That's why she could do the 12 hours.
Exactly. He would have been complaining. Are we there yet, Bertha? And next to it is the oldest car in the Audrain collections that's a proper motor car, which is an 1899 Crouch steam car. One of 3 built, the only one extant. And this is also an interesting story because in this age in which we currently live, where we're undergoing a transition of propulsion types, it's worth noting that basically every type of propulsion that we know today had been invented before World War I. We had electric cars, we had steam cars, we had hybrid cars, all before World War I. And one of the interesting things about this as well is the fact that people were looking to solve problems. I am fascinated by the cars of this age because people were presented with a problem and they found solutions, whatever solution came into their heads. No one told them, oh, that's not the way it's done, or you can't do that. It didn't matter. Someone tried something. Some of them worked better than others. Some of them didn't work at all. But it was this whole period of experimentation and great advancement at a very rapid rate. As I was reminded, I read years ago something which I thought was absolutely wonderful, and I always remember, is what is the phrase that's most often heard at the moment of scientific discovery? I didn't expect that. And we had a lot of that in the creation of the early automobile. And I'm going to talk about a little bit about statistics as well, but first I'll introduce the last car on this board, which is the 1904 Oldsmobile Curve Dash. Now, raise your hand, how many people know what the first production car was? The first car built in large numbers on a production line. Model T. Any other guesses? The Curve Dash Olds was the first car built on an assembly line with interchangeable parts. Now, Henry Ford did a great job of speeding up and automating the assembly line, and for that he is justly famous. But it's very funny because people have totally forgotten about this and the accomplishment of Ransom Olds. And this is very interesting too because here you have a 1-cylinder car, 95 cubic inches, and it was not only the first mass-produced car, but it also provided a level of transportation for a large number of people. They built 10,000 of these cars, which is quite an extraordinary number. And you also think about the fact that for the at this time, when this is, of course, a gasoline-powered single-cylinder, the Crouch is a double-action steam engine, and the Benz is a single-cylinder with a flywheel action. 1/3 of the cars on the road in 1902 were electric cars. And we also had the first hybrid car in 1901, the Lohner Porsche, designed by Ferdinand Porsche. And right before World War I, we had the Owen Magnetic, the first hybrid car. So it had a gasoline engine as well as electric engines on each of the wheels, individually driving the wheels and powered by a battery. So again, everything old is new again. But the pace of development that I talked about before can really be seen, step this way, in our second board, a variety of power. I mentioned electric cars, and on the left side, your right, of this board is a 1912 Roush & Lang electric roadster. This car, also in the Audrain collections, actually all these cars are in the Audrain collections, was first delivered to Briggs Cunningham's mother. So it has a bit of a Palm Beach connection there, and was a very, very good example of a very sophisticated electric car. It had a range of 60 miles and a top speed of about 30 miles per hour if you dared. And it was also part of that whole revolution of motoring. that one of the things that kept women from a lot of motoring was the fact that it was very difficult, it was noisy, it was smelly, cranking an engine was very dangerous, but the electric car offered a way to have more convenient, silent, quiet, and clean motoring in a time when most motoring was anything but. And so therefore they found great popularity among women drivers. The Roush & Lang also was a very sophisticated car that offered bevel drive. It was extremely smooth. I'll make a commercial here for the Audrain Museum Network on YouTube. I suggest you all go to YouTube and look at the Audrain Museum Network, subscribe, and you'll see lots of videos. We post 2 a week of me driving cars in the collection, a great program that I do with my friend Jay Leno called Mansions and Motor Cars, where we visit great mansions in Newport and also drive interesting cars and talk about the cars and talk about the architecture. And in one of the videos on the YouTube channel, I drive that Roush & Lang. We also showed it at the Pebble Beach Concours d'Elegance this year, and it took 3rd place in the unconventional propulsion class, and I drove that on the Pebble Beach tour, which was an absolute hoot. But it's also very interesting that cars like this were extremely popular, and electric cars actually would have taken a much larger share of the market, except for one thing. In 1912, when this car was built, it was the greatest year for electric car sales, and it was also the year that electric car sales started to go downhill because of the invention of the electric starter. All of a sudden, the biggest objection to driving a gasoline-powered car, the fact you had to crank it, which was hard and dangerous, was eliminated. And I have a number of interesting books from this period, and one of them is quite funny. It's an introduction to motoring for the gentleman and lady, and it describes all the different kinds of cars that there are. And it says there is the reciprocating internal combustion engine, the electric car, the steam car. Then it goes on to describe the assets and defects of the electric car, the assets and defects of the steam car, and then the wonderful assets of the internal combustion car. And then there's a little note that the book was sponsored by Packard and Peerless and Ford. So a slightly not disinterested opinion. But again, going back to the great advances that happened in this early automotive period, you realize that we have these single-cylinder cars from 1901, 1904. The other car on this board is a 1912 Packard Twin 6. First 12-cylinder car. And that's, sorry, this is a 1916 model. It was introduced in 1912. An absolute astonishing advancement when you realize that they'd gone from single-cylinder cars to a 12-cylinder power plant that early, before World War I. And this is also the engine that inspired Enzo Ferrari to power his cars with a V12 engine, because he was amazed at the effortless power and smoothness that the Packard 12 exhibited. And we were talking about Bertha Benn's trip to Pforzheim at 10 miles per hour with their 3/4 horsepower Benz Patent Motorwagen. The Packard now has 85 horsepower and can go 70 miles per hour. And you're thinking that's basically a decade and a half after horseless carriages were traveling at little more than walking speeds. So it's an extraordinary thing to consider, the level of advancement and the pace of advancement. But of course, what was to come would really transform everything. And that, of course, is the Model T. And this board is entitled A Toy No Longer. Cars had been very much the province of the ultra-wealthy and the upper middle class. They were cars that, yes, you took out for drives, but not for actual utility. No one commuted to work in a car. When Henry Ford introduced the Model T in 1908, he transformed the automotive landscape in a couple of ways. One, because as a farm boy, he realized that, and this actually came back to haunt him later in his life, he liberated thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people who heretofore their families had been born, lived, and died within 10 or 12 miles. All of a sudden, you could now cross states in your car by yourself at your schedule, at your convenience. Also, the Model T was incredibly durable. The cars heretofore had been slightly fragile, you needed a chauffeur or some sort of a mechanic to be with you all the time on any sort of a cross-country trip, a Ford Model T was unburstable. It had a track designed to drive in the horse tracks that were typically seen around the country because there were no highways, and people used pathways. It had a very compliant suspension, and it was built with vanadium steel, which didn't rust. So it's not uncommon to find Model Ts that have been sitting outside for 50, 60, 70, 80 years that have no perforation rusted through at all on their bodies or their chassis. It's an amazing thing to see. And also, Ford did something that we are completely unused to today, but which is actually common in consumer items. Every year the Model T was manufactured, the price went down. And we think about this and we think, in cars, that never happens. We think about this with flat screen TVs. I know we all remember the first flat screen plasma TVs that came out. They were $10,000. Now you can go to any Best Buy and buy one for $199. Printers, the same thing. It used to be the case with automobiles as well. As Henry Ford continued to manufacture the Model T and got his production processes to a point of efficiency, it became less and less important that he make more money on each unit because he was still making the same margin because he had amortized all the costs of production. Now, of course, that did come back to bite him a bit in that everybody knows the Model T stayed in production a bit too long. This example in the picture is a 1925 model, and in 1927, of course, the last Model T was built. 15 million of them were built from 1908 to 1927. When you think about the fact that it took the first 40 years of the existence of the motor vehicle for even 1 million cars to exist on the planet worldwide. And he built 15 million Fords. So it's something that also made the car an integral part of life in America and indeed around the world. The next board is self-explanatory. Great leaps forward. Now that the car was no longer a toy, now that there was real performance to be had, we look forward in two ways. One is pure performance, and the other, which is something I touched on in my talk last year, is one of style. The Model T proved that the automobile was a functional object. But once you have a functional object, what makes you want to buy another one? And the geniuses over at General Motors quickly realized that what will make you want to buy another one is style. And so the importance of bringing design elements and decorative elements into cars at all price ranges became very, very important. And also, at the same time, the march of technology continued. Now, I know that for one of my hosts here, Mr. Fisher, he loves Citroëns. And of course, Citroën is quite known and became known as a great company in the 1930s when they introduced the traction avant, their front-wheel drive car, in 1935. And one of the first front-wheel drive cars, however, to put into series production was the Cord L29. And Eric Loban Cord built this amazing industrial, I don't even know what to call it. He was the first conglomerate. He put together vastly different industries. At one point, the Cord companies comprised over 100 different businesses. And he thought that, well, the automobile industry is a fun industry and is really growing quickly. So he assembled a bunch of automobile companies, including Cord and Duesenberg and Auburn. And unfortunately, his timing on the automobile industry was not terrific because he put all this together right before the Depression. But nonetheless, he still managed to have his engineers and executives produce some of the greatest cars that America has ever seen. And the Cord front-wheel drive is certainly one of them. Again, we're thinking about the fact that this is a production front-wheel drive car in the 1920s that was capable of 77 miles per hour, which is quite amazing, and with beautiful bodies, factory and some coach-built bodies as well. But the true jewel, of course, in the Cord empire was Duesenberg. Fred and August Duesenberg were racers and engineers who were absolutely brilliant at designing and building cars and horrible businessmen who almost put themselves out of business at least 3 times before they were finally rescued by Cord and basically sort of sidelined from their own business. But nonetheless, they had delivered the design for an astonishing double overhead cam, 265 horsepower engine in 1928 that would power the Duesenberg Model J. Now, another wonderful fun fact, which I love to throw out, and you can use this and prove yourself as automotive experts and geniuses. They sold Duesenberg Model Js throughout the 1930s. Every Duesenberg Model J was built in 1928 and 1929. It just took them that long to sell the rest of them. And they would simply label them by the model year in which they were sold, rather than the year in which they were built. But nonetheless, when you look at the Duesenberg, and that particular example is a Murphy town car, which was delivered new to Nanaline Holt Inman Duke, the mother of Doris Duke, and again, another Newport connection. It is a car that shows both the great style of the cars of that age. The Murphy coach builders in Pasadena, California, among, I think, some of those spectacular designers of cars of that period. And they were noted for the delicacy and elegance of their designs. Very sporty and yet incredibly elegant. Very thin pillars for the windows and windshield, and very little decoration, but very, very well applied. And when, again, you think about the fact this is a limousine capable of over 90 miles per hour, and it just puts everything into a perspective that is quite something to think about. Oh, another thing on the Cord, one of the reasons why front-wheel drive cars were so difficult to build was because the Cord was the first one to have constant velocity joints in the front wheels. So that way you could actually turn the car while accelerating, which seems simple now, but nobody had actually thought of before. Next comes something which is really fascinating to me in automotive history, especially here in the US. As I mentioned, these two cars came out just at the dawn of the Depression. The next two cars, a Marmon 16 and a Cadillac V16, and there's a wonderful example of a Cadillac V16 here on display, came out in the height of the Depression. And it's the time of what they call the cylinder wars in American manufacturing, where each of the luxury manufacturers competed with each other to build the most luxurious multi-cylinder car they could. V8s were common. Ford had put a V8 in a middle-class car, so a V8 was not a big deal anymore. So you had to have a V12. And if you have a V12, why not a V16? And again, it wasn't done for speed or power, it was done for smoothness. The smoothness of a 16-cylinder engine cannot be imagined until you actually witness it. And it's one of those things, too, that is quite interesting, that industrial espionage is also not new at all. And one of the things that very few people remember the Marmon Motor Car Company now, but they could have been really the absolute kings of the market in the 1930s. And they knew that their point of differentiation was going to be that great V16 engine that was designed for them. However, the engine was designed, the production was planned, and the fellow who designed the engine for them was poached by General Motors. He brought his design with him to Cadillac. General Motors had a lot more money. They brought their car to market 6 months before the Marmon came out. And so therefore, when Marmon was introduced, everyone says, oh yeah, V16, so what? Cadillac's had that for months now. And it was a real shame because the Marmon is an amazing car, and also a car, as you can see in the style there, that's a LeBaron coupe. Very, very, very understated. You know, it was all about what the car could do, not how the car looked. And my last board here, as we creep up on the eve to World War II, is airplanes for the road. And aerodynamics also began to play an important part of automotive design as we approach World War II. People were realizing that you can put as much power as you want to in a car, but the cars didn't use it very efficiently. And it was quite famous, although probably apocryphal, that one of the Chrysler engineers drove one of their cars backwards and said, you know, the car actually goes better backwards than it goes forward, which I don't know if that's actually true. But in the 1930s, they began for the first time to look at the production techniques used in the construction of airplanes to see how they could be applied to automobiles. And again, not necessarily to make the car faster, but to use power more efficiently. And of course, the car on my left, your right, is the Chrysler Airflow, which is a great example and often taught as an example of automotive failure. The Airflow was not so much a failure as it wasn't a success by the standards of the time. And one of the things that Chrysler did is they tried to do a little too much in one envelope. not only did they have this very unusual and avant-garde styling, but it was also built in a completely different way than they'd ever built cars before. It was a unitized body, all steel, and they hoped would prove that the car would be much stronger and quieter and also lighter than a wood-framed steel body car might be. But they had a great deal of production problems switching over to this all-new construction, and they were under a great deal of pressure to get the car out as quickly as they could, so the first cars delivered were rather unreliable and had a number of fit and finish problems. That was not helped also by the fact that they sort of hedged their bets, and they put out the Chrysler, DeSoto, and Imperial Airflow models at the same time as continuing the production of the Chryslers in the more traditional style as well, offering the customers a choice in the showroom. And if you offer the customers a choice in the showroom, they're going to go with what they know, not what they don't. At the same time, however, quite interestingly, it wasn't that the public was not ready for an aerodynamic design, because in Europe, in the same year as the Chrysler Airflow was introduced, Fiat and Peugeot introduced totally aerodynamic bodies as well, which were great sales successes in Europe. Again, at numbers very, very, very small compared to what American manufacturers were used to selling, but nonetheless proved that a middle-class consumer would buy an advanced look in a car. The car next to the Airflow is a 1939 Alfa Romeo 6C 2500 Berlinetta with coachwork by Carrozzeria Touring. And this is a car that shows all of the aerodynamic study done for racing cars in Europe, especially in Italy, before World War II, with bodies which were honed in the wind tunnels at the Turin Polytechnic Institute in Turin, Italy, and also using a revolutionary patented system called Superleggera, or super light coachwork, in which none of the body panels were stressed at all. A network of thin tubes were welded to the chassis and platform, and very thin aluminum coachwork was attached to the aluminum tubes of the coachwork with little pieces of felt to insulate the coachwork from the aluminum tubing. There's quite a famous photograph taken at the Touring Body Works, which shows two women who worked as secretaries holding up the entire tubular framework of one of these Alfa Romeos, proving how incredibly light it was. Now, what they did in the factory, we don't know. They actually could have been bouncers in security. We don't know. We're not sure. But they're trying to look as weak as they possibly can while holding this thing up. But it is a wonderful thing to see because, again, thinking about the pace of development, Alfa Romeo, again, with the double overhead cams, like the Duesenberg Model J, double overhead cam engine, 95 horsepower, and capable of over 100 miles per hour in the street model with the sport single carburetor model. And this is, to me, the thing that amazed me, and perhaps will amaze you as well, or certainly be a point of conversation as it was today at lunch. There were 53 years separate the Benz Patent Motorwagen and that Alfa Romeo. 0.75 horsepower, top speed of 10 miles per hour, 96 horsepower, top speed of 106 miles per hour. That same distance from today is 1969. Have we seen anywhere near the pace of development from 1969 to today? I would argue not. I'm open to argue it with anybody, but I would say no. This is a period of time which we will never see again. I think about this, and this is only from 1886 to 1939, but I think about my grandmother, who died at 104 in the mid-1980s. She was born in gaslight and died in space travel. That is the kind of progress that we've seen in the automotive world in this exhibition. Thank you very much. Sure.
What's your favorite car?
I'll make another plug for the Audrain Automobile Network. We recently charged our viewers on the network, if we could get to 30,000 subscribers on the network, they could ask for a video on demand. And the video they asked for was Q&A with me. That was one of the questions that was asked. So go look at the video. And I can't answer my favorite car because I love so many cars. I have answered the question this way, which is I've been asked, if you could only have one car, what might it be? I'm not saying it's my all-time favorite car, but if I could only have one, it'd probably be a car that very few of you here have heard of, but I like weird cars, which is why I'm such great friends with Jeff. It's a 1952 Fiat Automotive with bodywork by Rappi. I love those cars. The great sports racing cars. I love the idea of a great sports racing car, a car that you could drive to the track, race, and drive back home. To me, that's the ultimate form of car.
Well, the next time there's $1 billion, $2 billion lotto drawing and I win, I will buy that for you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll give you the address to which it should be delivered. Any other questions?
Have you ever heard, I have one other one, quickly.
The follow-up question.
Have you ever heard of a company called the Cunningham Car Company?
Of course, absolutely. Right across from Jeff's garage, yes.
My husband's family had that a long time ago, obviously.
Yes.
I was wondering if that was ever on the radar.
Oh, absolutely. No, Cunninghams are everything. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Donald, thank you. Just a phenomenal talk. We can't wait to see the exhibit when we come to Newport.
Yes, come to Newport. Come to the exhibition.
Just to put things in context, along with Donald's timeline he spoke to today, Ann Norton was born in Selma, Alabama in 1905. Wanted to become a missionary, went to Cooper Union to major in religious studies, and then at some point in time she had a calling to the visual arts, where she ended up studying in New York City during the Great Depression. Imagine a woman at that time, under the best male sculptors. And so as we conclude Donald's talk with the end of World War II, that was the time that she was invited to be the first sculpting teacher at what was then the Norton School of Art. And as her life path would have it, Ralph Norton's first wife, who helped to build this home, passed away, and she married him just a year later and began the planning of her monumental sculptures. That this beautiful garden she also envisioned close to her death in 1982 evolved. So it's great to think along that century path. And if any of you have not had a chance to visit our gallery today, we are celebrating this week a ribbon cutting for completely newly restored Norton House. So we've doubled our space, and we hope you'll come back and see us through the season. And please stay and join us. We've got a tribute to our Gold Star families and veterans coming up at 3:30, followed by our Grand Tour Parade of Cars, and that is a sight to see as it leaves Ann Norton Sculpture Garden. So thank you again for being here, and thank you to our Grand Marshal, Donald Osborne.
Thank you.